safeguarding democracy today and in the future. Of course, you're going to engage a bit in just defining democracy, but well, let's just get into it. We're joined by two people. Nerima Wako-Ojiwa is the executive director at Siasa Place. Jackson Obare works for an organization that has Roman numerals. No, those ones.
C
Quisha.
100.
Quisha.
V is 5. I
I
is
is
1.
So CIV is what? IV is 4.
IV is 4.
Yeah.
C
Yeah.
is 100.
What you guys
So
struggling
CIV
with?
is
Yes,
what?
you can tell us.
We want to show that we're intelligent.
I'm definitely not loading my brain with that one.
So we were right. We'll be right.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric. ForumCIV. It's not CIV. It's
Okay.
just
See?
ForumCIV.
See?
One word.
Okay.
It's civil society. CIV is for civil society.
Completely off.
Got that too.
What is F in Roman numerals? Okay. Forward. Jackson is from ForumCIV. He's a regional manager, Eastern and Southern Africa. Karibuni sana to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you.
You're sure it's not a Forum 104?
No.
Okay.
I've never thought of that.
It would be cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
But he will explain to us why, of all the names of the planet, they had to choose that one. There must be some very sound logic behind it.
Kabisa. You'll tell us that shortly. But City has the day's proverb.
Today is Thursday. It's the day before Friday. What?
You're right.
Yes. And one is usually very tired by the time we get to Thursday. So the proverb is short, to the point, easy to understand. No profound interpretation required. A black cow also gives white milk.
A black cow also gives white
White
milk.
milk.
Yeah, you moved in the middle of the short city when Mombi is wondering, "Aya, kumenda."
He was dropping the mic.
Oh, mic drops.
No, the reason why I was moving was usually I sit exactly here and then I'm told to move.
Okay.
So today I wasn't waiting to be told to move. I was just moving.
Oh, closer.
And then the day I move, they've got the act together.
Okay. Mombi, does he need to move?
Okay.
He's okay. He's fine. Yes. A black cow will also give white milk. Nerima, what do you make of that proverb?
I'll probably be off because I'm normally off with your proverbs.
No,
No,
you're never off.
I'm never off.
You've never been off even once.
Hey, okay,
Yes.
so all cows are the same.
See? How can you possibly be off with that one?
All cows
Like
eat
Like
grass.
we all bleed red. That's how I'm understanding it.
See?
All cows are the same.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's obvious. So what do you think the proverb means? What does the proverb mean? What's the inner meaning of this proverb?
The inner meaning that your appearance doesn't matter. You're going to produce. I don't know.
No, go on. Just go on with what you're saying.
Yeah, go on with what I'm saying.
Yes.
Okay. That appearance doesn't matter because a lot of times, I guess, but black cows are rare. And so we assume that they would have special milk or abilities, but genuinely, we are all the same, or all cows are the same by producing milk.
Ah, voilà.
Is that not a good point?
Quite.
Yes.
How you say like the outlier, like the black cow or like the black sheep would be
Yeah.
to do something different, but it's still white milk, yo.
Yeah.
You know, with that black, you're on the mark and you're okay until you get to black cat.
No, black cats, you're a witch.
Suddenly,
Sorry.
you're in the realm of the supernatural. You've left the animal kingdom.
And there are brooms and things.
Jackson, what is your interpretation of this?
Of course, the bottom line is a cow. You know, whether black, white, and what's expected of them is to produce milk. So irrespective of, in view of seeing what we are going to discuss today, irrespective of who you are in holding a particular office, there is a bare minimum that's expected from you And in this case, all cows are expected to produce white milk. So there is that expectation of whatever that you are going to do, either from society, and therefore, in my view, doesn't matter whether you're a black man, a white man, there are bare minimums of things that have been defined for you to deliver. That's my interpretation of this.
Mm-hmm.
He was doing very well
Until
he got to that.
White
There are
man.
black man, a white man.
Replacing a cow.
Okay.
Yes.
white men produce white men.
Black men.
South. Okay. Back here. Democracy and safeguarding democracy. Let's start with the definition. What is democracy? This is to you, Jackson.
Oh, my understanding of democracy in a very simplified manner is participating in a process where my voice or our voices will be heard in the course of influencing a particular decision. So we must be part and parcel of this discussion of where we want change or influence that particular change.
So
At whatever
democracy
level.
is all inclusive,
All inclusive.
all participatory.
Yes.
That's the definition.
Simplified.
Okay. Nerima, what's yours?
There has to be, definitely agree with Jackson. The participation is important. There has to be an element of voting in democracy. So there are different kinds of democracy. But at some point, citizens have that right to actually vote. So the levels of it will be different, but your voice in the voting democracy.
Okay. Does it mean that all votes are equal?
You see, that's why I said different levels.
Okay.
In some instances, we have seen a pushback where there's this stage of nomination, right? Tweedism. So William Boss Tweed, the idea of having a select group of people that we now must nominate first, and then the rest of the public can vote, but that selection is done previously. It's still voting, but it's not equal, because it means there's another group of people who decide who you vote for. And then the direct democracy is the one where someone who's interested in a particular position now shares their interest, then gets on the ballot, then the public votes. So genuinely, all votes are supposed to be equal, but there are different levels or types of democracy where it's not necessarily so. And that's as recent as Hong Kong, where they tried to bring in that process of a nomination. And then we saw the large protests, mainly from young people, students, yeah.
Is it acceptable that you have several variances of democracy? Because we've said that democracy in and of itself is a changing, moving phenomenon. It is not static. It is not cast in stone. It was an idea in the mind of one who verbalized that idea and made it a form of practice for nations of people, or rather, communities of people at that time. And then those communities grew into what we now know today as the nation state. So, is it not then acceptable that democracy in and of itself is a fluid, organic process that each nation state, having been established futurely, then can decide what manner of democracy works for them?
I think so. I think so. But maybe we might not have the same opinion because, like if you look at countries like Australia, voting is mandatory, right? And then you have countries like ours where you choose whether you want to vote or not. So they feel that works for them. They feel that's important. But also it's bringing up larger questions on democracy because, I was sharing earlier with Jackson and Abdul that The Guardian shared an article earlier this week on Monday and just basically sharing how young people are slowly losing faith in democracy. So they did that global research. It was OSF, Open Society Fund did it. And it showed that when it comes to democracy, like 80% of young people, they're like, yeah, I want to live in a democratic society. Then when those same youth are asked, well, is democracy the only way? Is it the best way? That number decreases. It goes to about 57%. So there's a sense that there needs to be a review to see whether my country does this work in terms of voting for the representatives, because they feel they don't feel represented even when they do that voting. And for many of them, they actually said, I'd rather have a strong leader in power because at least I'll be able to see my needs met than, you know, going through this democratic process and I feel irrelevant, I feel ignored, I feel like I'm not represented. So I think it's something that the thinkers, philosophers around democracy didn't quite take into consideration, or didn't think populations would grow large. Talk about millions of people making choices, and then we're talking about technology advancements, and we're talking about maybe some people not really in tune with policy and ideology to be able to make the best elections. So you have people who are selecting based on who gave me the best bribe the most recently.
Or who is like me.
Yeah.
Where I'm from.
I know.
But
Yeah.
think for a second. If you look at the origins of any practice, what is considered to be the foundation on which that particular matter is based? If you look at the time and the period, you will often find it was ahead of its time. Way ahead of its time. And that's part of the reason why implementing it and instituting it was such a struggle. Because the human capacity to adapt, oddly enough, and also change, the two go hand in hand, is probably what it is that enables this particular species to survive as it does. Now, if you then look at that start point and you look at now, and look at what has happened, what perhaps is lost in the conversation is that in the absence of that, this progression would never have been there in the first place.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
So its rightful place sometimes is not accorded it. We compare it, not in principle, but in essence, and say, well, this democracy at this time, this is what they considered. And even now, you see, to question democracy and to ask about it is actually the essence of democracy as I see it. So that you understand just the ever-evolving process and the need to understand how it relates to you in your time. For instance, why must we vote? Is it the only way to exercise our democracy?
And is voting the definition of democracy?
Yes.
Because, like Jackson, you said, it's about inclusive decision-making process. Now, inclusive decision-making doesn't have to be necessarily that you cast a ballot, as long as it's inclusive. And inclusive doesn't have to be all-inclusive necessarily at universal suffrage, at everybody, one person, one voice, one vote. It can be representative. So I feel like over time we have gotten to a point where I think society, based on whichever part of the world this was, and based on other geopolitics and all, started sort of defining democracy into a certain way. That democracy is when the people go to vote and elect their leaders. To do what? To lead them. In what? You're delegating your powers for decision making to somebody else. So are we still talking about all-inclusive decision making?
If it was all inclusive and if it was to achieve what it can, then the one thing that it will provide you, just like you freely elect, you should actually freely withdraw.
Yeah.
But we freely elect.
Difficult. It's
Withdraw is-
difficult.
Try and withdraw.
Withdrawing is also difficult.
Try.
And also
Extremely.
freely electing, you are forced into this thing of accepting that you're in a minority.
Yes.
Why should you accept that you're in a minority? Why should your decision now become less because you are in a minority? And now you're forced to go by the ideals of this majority who said that this is the way we shall go. Why?
sound like a liberal.
So, Jackson, can you have, even as these ideas come about, because we're looking at ways in which you're going to shape nation states in the future. What was prescribed by philosophers and thinkers generations ago, obviously we've seen is not the same today. However, in as much as we want to be democratic in thought and democratic in governance and leadership, it is clear that these thoughts must be shepherded at some point. Now, at what point does the shepherding of these democratic intricacies move from democracy to dictatorship? Based on what Eric is saying, who says that it has to be this way? Well, you're not going to just have a fluid way of doing things. Oh, let's wake up tomorrow morning and let it be like this. No, that's why you have constitutions. That's why you have laws and say, let us behave this way moving forward for a period of time, however long that will be. Then we decide, okay, we don't want to do it anymore. Then we start to have conversations like, let's amend the constitution, right? Can you have a democratic way of doing things, or can you invite your own democracy without shepherding it? Can you do that?
Maybe to give a bit of also a context, we had a discussion in the morning before I answer your question. We were saying in schools, because we are talking about empowering the next generation. And I've been quite observant to see how children in schools, both primary and secondary, are actually electing their representatives. Value-based. They have a president, they have a vice president, they have wherever they call presidents of different sectors within the school. And yet, at that point in time, there is no money exchanging hands for them to elect their leaders. The same to the high school. Then we discussed, where does the game changes? Does it change at the university? Because then the university is mimicking national politics where big monies have to flow for you to be elected into a particular office. And we were concluding that if we could behave like children who are electing their leaders based on values and they are serving them, then you could say democratically they elected their leaders and nobody was coerced because of the belief system. So in a mix of how does it transition maybe from being a democratic to autocratic? I read an article. Dictatorial. I read an article. It was The Economist in April. The world according to Xi Jinping.
All according to Xi Jinping.
Yes.
The leader of the president of China.
So he said, how is seeing democracy different from the rule? What we're talking about, how do you go on forcing people to adopt your system without understanding their values?
Yeah.
And saying it doesn't matter what you are doing on one hand, but is it within the value system of that society? I read the article meaning if it is business, they are focusing on developing and improving the lives of the people. And they are not interested in meddling in the internal affairs of that particular state to influence them to do how they wish. And we all know all these are systems of governance. So people are choosing which system of governance is better. And most we talk about a democratic system.
Okay.
And given that now there are more questions coming, hearing what The Guardian is writing about the young people not really into what the system is providing for a holistic society, but individuals. So we are moving into, is this system providing my needs? I don't want to care whether my neighbor is being served, but if I see my needs are served, then I think the system is working. But that will not also be universally accepted across, because there are those who will feel that system is not.
And this system, what is it really? Is it some amorphous creation? Or when you talk system, what is it?
Yeah.
Because if you look at every country in the world, everything that we're talking about here and the definition thereof or the practice of it will be determined by the group that is in power.
Yeah.
That's the system.
Sure.
And what they bring into force. As you're talking about the universities, see, at that light bulb moment, it wasn't the university processes mimicking our political system. No. If you look at the history of our university politics, the university politics actually acted as the opposition in many times when we had a single party state in this country. That's where you could find people saying things that politicians didn't dare say. No, it's a politician who infused their nefarious ways into the politics of the university. It is them who introduce money into. And once they introduce the money, money has its own ways of doing what it does best. So, we are where we are. Give it time. Money will come into the election of leaders within primary and secondary school.
And
Just give it time.
If people accept that money is going to be one of the yardsticks of electing their leader, so be it. If it's universally accepted.
I mean, some of the school of thought, then fine. Maybe poverty, actually not maybe, poverty is bad, right? 75% of young people are unemployed in this country. So yeah, money is going to speak volumes for them. But you don't have to vote for that person who gave you that money. I'm just saying.
True.
Take the money, okay? I don't understand your situation. Probably very desperate. Take it. But then why do you feel this sense of, I must vote for that person because they gave me money? I think...
But is that not a good thing?
Because you have a value system.
Yes.
It's not a
It's
value
obligation.
system. You
Yeah.
guys,
It's reciprocity.
I've been to villages.
If you're
and they
saying
do it
accept the
because
money,
they are
then you
scared
have
that
already
money
opened that box.
Has witchcraft. Let us be honest. They are afraid of taking that money and not voting for that person because that person
Kitamramba.
put witchcraft on it, and they are going to be cast.
And that's a real fear for them.
That's a real fear.
Okay.
That's a real fear. It's not about values.
Well, that is a value. By the way, the moment you subscribed to a certain focus on infinity, okay, as in the supernatural.
Got it.
Yes.
Whichever direction.
Yes.
Up or down.
But the question I will have then, because she's mentioning about the village, and we are talking about young people, do they subscribe to that kind of value that if they got X amount of money from X person, and if they don't vote, I don't think the young people are culturally aligned to those kind of beliefs.
You'd be surprised. But this is the thing. But at the end of it all, whether it is an individual who has taken money from somebody, they're not thinking beyond the vote. Do you understand?
Yeah.
We're not talking about governance and what is really going to happen after that. This transaction ends here. Whether it is a young person, whether it is an old person in the village, doesn't matter where it is. That usually in those cases where somebody has received money, we're talking about reciprocity here, and then what I give you is the vote. Beyond that, we're done. Because guess what? Tomorrow, after I have voted, I still have to go and look for what is going to feed me 1, 2, 3. But what we're saying here is that does this money that you're being given translate into you making a decision about the governance, about how things are going to change for you for the better? And unfortunately, for the majority of cases, it is not.
And you know why? Because this whole thing of voting of this is an external concept. The concept that we have is we communally choose how
our leader.
our leaders shall be.
Consensus.
Yes.
Some consensus. This thing of one
Or it
vote
came
and
down
then
the family.
yes.
Yes.
And once that person is there's a system that's going to check them. Not you individually saying, you have some oversight role, you've got to do. No. So this whole democracy thing is, whose definition of democracy are we discussing?
And why does it have to be somebody else's?
Is that the only definition of democracy? They have said, those in the West, that the Chinese don't have democracy. Like, really?
It's a different system.
You
Because
see?
what you're explaining, Eric, is negotiated democracy.
It is a democracy.
It is.
So let's take a break. We shall continue that conversation shortly.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
We're talking about safeguarding democracy. And as we were going into that break, we were saying, okay, so what's democracy? How many types of democracy are there? You're saying there's negotiated democracy in some countries. Why is it negotiated?
Negotiated because even here, it's the Council of Elders who will sit down and say, you know what, this time around, let's support this particular individual from this clan at this time. And that happened a lot in 2022. And interestingly, Mzalendo did a report around negotiated democracy. Some people prefer it in certain parts of our country. And also it's intertwined with culture and tradition a lot. But you also find that when we talk about affirmative action or representation, a lot of times it's very difficult to find the Council of Elders. In very few cases, they'll support women or a lot of women. So there are very few, even I think it's Lesuda, who was one of the individuals that I know of that was, selected by the Council of Elders in Samburu to vie for Member of Parliament. But it was after a nomination.
Yes.
Yes, it was after a nomination.
Yes.
But a lot of times, it's very rare for the council to just select a woman in the community.
It's a new thing because the councils were not doing that previously.
No, they were not doing that previously.
But they're embracing a new thing.
Yeah, they're embracing it
Naisula
slowly.
was nominated and exposed to the community
Exactly.
as a nominated senator. And the community saw, all right, so we've got, and it's not that they were new to having women leaders. That community has had women leaders, okay? But then they saw the potential of this person. When she went back to the constituency and sought votes, at first she got, a number of votes. The second time, she got almost unanimous endorsement.
Yes.
So,
yes.
you see, it's a progressive society.
Yes.
Continue.
It is progressive. And that's where now we are saying that democracy does have its pros. And that's why, in the beginning of the conversation, we were saying that perhaps we need to look at the context of democracy in relation to our country and our culture. Because even when you look at Wajir, for instance, there was no woman who was elected. All the women there have been nominated. Okay? And so who knows that maybe 10 years from now, hopefully less, maybe 5 years from now, the next election in 2027, I'm hoping to see that Wajir residents will actually elect a woman, since the nominated ones are around them. But even when we look at Kitui, I don't even have to go far. Kitui only had one woman elected. And I'm talking about MCA, MP, like the whole assembly had one woman, an MCA. So all the nomination seats in MCA.
But it's not because they have never seen or elected a woman.
No, it's not because of
They had
that.
a woman governor, for crying out loud. They had a woman who had served as an MP.
Yes,
They had a woman who
Charity
was
Ngilu, yes,
a
Charity Ngilu.
presidential
But there are
candidate.
very many other women.
Yes.
But what I'm saying here is the idea or the standard idea of democracy that works in the US might not work in Kenya. We are seeing it failing in certain parts of Kenya.
Nerima, when were women allowed to vote in the US?
Very recently, in the 1900s.
A50. Okay?
Yes.
Now, you tell me, these are the people who champion democracy as though they invented it.
City, I see your point.
Okay, thank you. Go on.
I see your point.
Yes.
And that's why I'm saying that we need a different view of democracy is an ideology, it's an idea. But then there's some things that we can gain from it and put in our context. And that's what we are here to talk about. Not saying that it is the perfect system and everyone needs to follow through with it the way the idea is in the US. Because even the US has struggled with representation.
Okay, it's kind of like what my mother says, that you receive a recipe for something, okay? You have it in a book. But then you've seen, as you've come along in your cooking and etc., you've seen I can tweak this thing a little bit to make it taste better, right? So in Nigeria, we have crayfish and we say, look, maybe they put something. I said, no, look, if I add some crayfish or palm oil, this thing could actually taste better, or it could suit me based on what I have available, right? So based on that, what are some things that you've seen, this democracy, it makes sense and it could be applied here. Some major things we're going to chuck out the window. We're not necessarily going to use them for Kenya. But as we see democracy, what are some things that we say
are available for us?
what
and
should
others
we
are
use?
Unavailable.
Unavailable. What are some of the things as you see, that would make sense here that we can keep?
I like the idea of diversity. I think democracy pushes for inclusion. It's not perfect, but the very idea that we say, who is in the room when it comes to making decisions, and let's have different voices in the room, that is democracy. And I feel that the sense that we are able to say that we want diversity on these platforms for me, is a huge shift that we can gain from. Yes, because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be able to do the work that I do.
Yep.
Yeah. And so it is about pushing those barriers.
To have as many voices in the room as possible.
That's one. Okay.
Okay.
So the second one is, of course, is accountability, because when you, on one hand, you have participation in the process, but is there accountability mechanisms of all that will be discussed for both ways, whether it is the voters and whether it is on the people who are elected? Are they also feeling that they are accountable to the voices that are raising in this space? I think it's something that we can learn, but it's a debate around this accountability also. It's a huge debate, I know, with different perspectives. But as a principle, I think it's expected that accountability becomes one of this governance system of democratic state.
You see, let's talk about accountability from a realistic perspective. Accountability in this country. How do we practice it? What are our biases? And are they principles? Yes, they are. But if you look at how we treat accountability, let's look at it, because what is often glaring is if you look at it at the top leadership, say the presidency, okay? So long as the president comes from your neck of the woods and represents the community that you come from, he can't do anything wrong. Not possible. Then you come to the political leaders in the areas they come from. Once again, same story. It is not possible for a elected, appointed, anointed leader of a community to do anything wrong. So when you have, say, for instance, party nominations, the abominations that take place during those processes, because it is ours, it is theirs, again, nothing can possibly be wrong because it is them who are doing whatever it is. Now, how then do we understand accountability when it concerns us? And it is for us, and it is within maybe our political party, led by our anointed, appointed leader. Okay? How? Because it works when we are pointing fingers at other people. It works very well. And we point at everything that they're doing wrong. But we seem to have a bit of a problem when it comes to pointing inward.
But it comes closer.
Yes.
But again, City, I think if we contextualize it,
Yes.
if we look at this model of democracy that has been promoted by others,
Yes.
that then creates these other institutions that say, all right, this is how accountability shall be, and it shall be directly accountable to your people, and these are the institutions that shall bring that accountability to the people. It's different. But have our societies not had accountability mechanisms for the leaders?
We've always had them.
Yes.
We've always had
And
them.
they've worked. And to know that that thing actually does exist is bring that accountability all the way down. So start from the president, move, come to the MCA. How are those local leaders held accountable? When people are in a community are feeling, no, things are not going right with our local leaders, what do? How do they hold them accountable? What are those systems that are used? Either Wazes, Wanatumwa, where Indinini or Wazes call this person. There's a system.
There's a system
that works, and is the problem is this democracy that we are practicing.
it
ignores
erodes
these
that
systems.
completely.
And by ignoring those systems, then we have a democracy that's not working for us. How can we mix those two?
I think, as she said in the beginning, that democracy is an evolving process. And over time, since these are borrowed ideas from elsewhere, and the reason they are becoming a bit of incompatible with what our traditional proper leaders have put in place of accountability mechanism. For example, you could talk about dispute resolution. Why does it take you go to court and be told there is a mechanism, alternative dispute, because there is a recognition that there already a system in place that can handle this more effectively and efficiently without going through
litigious
a litigation process that can take many years and never ends, and the conflict does not even get resolved. So with that recognition in place, I think we should also embed these culturally systems of governance that are there, so that we can see an harmonious society. But I agree with you, Eric. The fact that we have a borrowed concept which seems to be conflicting with what we believe in, so we put it on a side. Accountability, okay, this is what X prescribes for us to do, but I think it's not working. So we put it on a side, and then we start doing what we know best, or we don't even fit in any of these two systems. And I think that's the problem that we are having. Talked about national level, the president coming down to the MCS, and you've also said you donate the power freely, but you don't have the free will to recall back.
No, you don't.
So rules have been designed to protect much more the people you gave power freely to lead you than to recall them back. So it becomes a bit of a tedious process. And I think that's why some people are now feeling, especially the youth, we don't want to participate in this. We are staying, and whoever wants to use,
actually,
do you know? Your plan.
Let me tell you, the generationally, if you look at the changes, I have the advantage of chronology here, so I can talk about more changes. You will find that when these group of people, so-called youth, I speak as somebody who was a youth once, when they come of age, they will not do things very differently, unless something drastic or fundamental happens. They will. In all honesty, they would not, because the prevailing culture is we will talk about accountability so long as we are not being held accountable. We will talk about change at the top so long as we are not at the top. But then as soon as we get to the top, we maintain the status quo. If anything, we insult that particular system and skew it to suit our purposes even more than the people who preceded us. You would assume that when people get formal education and acquire pieces of paper that determine and proclaim these qualifications, they would behave better. They do not. We have a parliament that is by far the most educated parliament we've ever had in this country. And look at the way they're going about their business.
Maybe, sometimes we ask about what is it about democracy that we can take and use and apply. But we must also ask ourselves the question that before these borrowed ways of doing things came about, what were we doing?
Were we democratic?
Was it a different process? Was the system of governance in place working for us? And we can talk about Kenya, or we could talk about the land that now Kenya exists within, or we can look at the whole of the continent. Look at what was happening where people were able to govern themselves. Did we have, and it's in history, did we have levels of corruption? Did we have blatant inability to be able to deal with issues of development, of inclusion? Did we have those issues? Were they there, hitting us in the face in which they are, in the manner in which they are today? So one must ask, as opposed to what about democracy can we take? What was wrong with the ways in which we were dealing before? And can we employ some of those to be able to chart the course in which we go? We have to be thinking about that. It cannot always be a borrowed system because we've seen that it's clashing. It's obvious that it's clashing. It's been clashing for 50 years. It doesn't matter where in Africa you go. It's clashing. And why is that? Did it clash in this manner before this borrowed system came into place? If it didn't, then perhaps that's our answer.
There's a concept that was introduced to us, and the term that is used is dictatorship. And you look at, say, some of the old traditional leaders, and they are referred to as dictators. Now, if you look at that system of governance, I'm saying governance deliberately, you will find that many of these people were polygamous, hugely, massively.
Properly.
Yes. And there was a reason behind it. One, many of these chieftains were recognized because people took things to them. But if you look at the system by which they had wives, it represented the various communities within his enclave. So at some level, these were his advisors. But because people gave to you, it was expected of you to give to them when they came to you also. That was the understanding. So people allowed it because they figured it is okay. When I have a problem, and you didn't need to go to him directly. You needed to go to the wife.
To your relative.
To your relative, precisely. It was a system. And in many ways, it worked.
Was it inclusive?
It was very inclusive.
Was it representative?
It was extremely representative.
Did it have checks and balances?
It had serious checks and balances.
Democracy.
Yes.
Let me give you an example of one of the communities in this world that has been labeled dictatorial, backward, all kinds of things. In today's Myanmar, right? When you look at the system of governance, when you look at the structure of government, rather, there is what would be akin to the House of Representatives. But each representative is from it's huge because it represents a tribal clan of the entire nation. That's the House of Representatives. So those individuals, in the way in which they govern over their communities, they come and contribute to what is going to happen in the nation. But because, of course, of many things that have caused internal strife, what you hear is that it's a dictatorial state of doing things, and we must, by all means, put the strong man down. But why do we say this? Because they saw that somehow, before this foreign thing came to us, there was a way in which we were able to settle our governance. And it was successful for them. I mean, after all, who are you to come and tell them that the way they are doing things don't work? Unless you come with a musket and in one hand and a Bible or something else in the other. Why do we shun the way in which we used to do things as opposed to incorporating that moving forward? And I think those could be the answers, because in all this struggle, what we're looking for is an answer. We're looking for a way in which we can keep being fluid so that we can remove some of these issues. We talk about tribalism. Who's to say that it's bad to include your tribe or where you're from in how you lead in this greater circle of things? Who's to say that you cannot?
But remember also, there were negative things within our society, and there were norms. And with the time, those norms were gotten rid of. Okay, this evolutionary process that societies go through have a way of pushing things aside. Let me give you an example of a country where I have relatives. It's called Papua New Guinea.
Well done.
Okay?
Where that shirt is from.
Yes, where this shirt is from. That is why. Yes, this shirt comes from Papua New Guinea. Yes, there's a headgear that accompanies it, but I did not wear the headgear today. Yes. Every time communities have an issue, now issues could range from this. Somebody from their clan disagrees with someone from another clan, and two people from this other clan gang up to beat this person. Let me explain to you what the response will be. The people who come from the clan of this person who was beaten will hear of it, and they'll arm themselves immediately.
It's like the gangs.
Yes, immediately. And should they come across anyone from the clan who beat this person of theirs, that person is going to be hacked. It's not complicated. Now, this is in town. When the relatives back at home hear of this, now they'll arm themselves even more and look and go to that other clan where they feel they were offended, and a fight will ensue. Now, this one needs to be tamed.
Absolutely.
Because many people who are innocent, you're busy just walking, going about your business. You didn't even know that that you are represented in some misdeed. You didn't know. Okay? Now, but in the same way, you will find that because of that togetherness, think of that mindset being changed towards ensuring that development comes to everyone. It's the same thinking, so that you look after the interest of everyone who comes from your community. How much more will they develop? How much more will they go ahead? Because you do look after the interests of other people, and you're concerned about what happens to your neighbor, literally. See? But when you throw the baby out with the bathwater, you sometimes miss that very thing which in essence is the fabric that holds this community together. And once you dismantle it, then that community is at sea. And they'll look for everything and anything that seems to work, but they will not have anything that they call their own that gives them that sense of being and purpose.
The direction and true north.
Yes.
Maybe to add to this, because of looking at these systems of governance, we talked about democracy, and we were saying there are many forms of democracy within democracy itself, autocratic governments. I think for the last couple of months, Nerima is talking about the last 3 years, we have 11 coups in Africa. So the latest one in Gabon, I was so surprised that the people were celebrating in the streets that now the person who was elected through democratic process has been told you cannot lead this government, and the people are quite happy. I think it calls for democracy. Is it on trial, or democracy needs to be more reviewed? Because if people feel that you are elected, because that's also another question, whether it was genuine election to get that result, and then they are happy in the streets that we now have a military rule, then there's something that needs to be discussed, what's happening about this system of democracy around the globe. And we agreement of, we had systems that were working. Did we stop looking at what were the weaknesses to strengthen, other than entirely borrowing a foreign concept, which is not also entirely working perfectly, and we want to adopt it 100%. So that is the departure point.
What's wrong with autocracy? What is wrong with autocracy?
It's discussions and different perspectives of you have no room sometimes to ask questions, and when something goes wrong, what it said, it's the order of the day. Yeah. So,
but is it a system that's created, or is it an individual or a group of people who come in?
The way democracy
Can we
is
say
a
that
system.
autocracy is accepted when there's an autocratic system somewhere, an autocratic government, it's accepted? Or is it a system that imposes itself on the people?
As we said, democracy is a system, autocracy is another system. They are all systems of governance across, whether they are created by individuals who impose themselves to be leaders and eventually gets accepted. And it has happened. People, and sometimes then there's transition from autocracy to democracy. So there are systems which can interchange at one point or the other, depending on individuals who want to seize power.
We're running out of time, because I'd wanted you to look at the concept of a police state and what constitutes it. We don't have time to look at it. But if you look at the West, which claims to be the citadel of democracy, look at how they go about managing their people. The freedom they speak of, if you look at it in essence, isn't actually freedom. You just have a very huge cage in which you can move. So you actually think you're actually free.
My goodness.
I agree in some regards, City.
Yes.
But I feel like even when we talk about the number of coups that have happened in Africa, all the generals are below the age of 40. And so when younger leaders are feeling that the only way to get power is through violence, and people are celebrating and not quite understanding what this means for their country, because many of them mean it.
Nerima, some of these are bloodless coups. I said, some of them are bloodless coups. People aren't actually... The old coups where you look for the nearest border to head towards when you hear there's a coup, that isn't quite what's happening now.
Time is up.
Yes.
Interesting conversation. Nerima Wako-Ojiwa is the executive director at Siasa Place, and Jackson Obare is the regional manager for Eastern and Southern Africa at ForumCIV. Thank you very much for joining us today. Keep it here for more conversations. We'll be talking about democracy in ODM next.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.